You know, when I was a kid and I saw Return of the Jedi, which is actually the first Star Wars movie I ever saw, um, and when the movie ends, they kill the Emperor, Darth Vader sacrifices himself, and the rebels win the war. And you would think, or at least we thought as kids, that when that happened, when the dictator fell, that the Empire would also fall, and that there would be freedom restored to the galaxy, and that the rebellion would form the new republic. Then, of course, the Zahn books came out and talked a little bit more about what happened after. But the idea of the New Republic was one that, we kind of knew or assumed would happen when the Emperor fell. But one of the things that does make sense about the J.J. Abrams and Disney direction that they went in with Episode 7 and with the post Episode 6 stuff, one of the things that does make sense, that you have to give them credit for, is that this idea of the Empire having the Imperial remnant, and this idea of the Empire, which again, this was done before, but it makes sense to not just assume that the war was truly over when the Emperor died, because the Emperor had regional governors, he had Moffs, he had a vast empire throughout an entire galaxy. And it makes sense that some of the people who were Imperial loyalists, some of the people who were laundering money through the empire and things like that, that they would not be okay with a new leadership that would give freedom to the people. And then when you start analyzing the prequel version of the Emperor, the fact that he has a backup plan does make sense. I mean, in character of who the Emperor is, because he's a big, smart, methodical planner. So the idea of there still being an empire after Return of the Jedi, which is what a lot of this is about, this episode, and a lot of this stuff, it makes sense. It really does make sense that it wasn't just a total victory, that the Empire was still out there, and that the war kind of continued on. Even though the Emperor was not in charge anymore, the Empire had kind of become this sort of, I guess in a way, this militia. Still, it makes sense that it wouldn't just be a clean changeover of power, and I just wanted to kind of get that out of the way here before we get into this Mando review. This is a review for Chapter 15. We're almost done with this season, and I wanted to get that out of the way because I see some people who overly criticize the direction that they went in, but I've never had a problem with that aspect of the story. I'm not saying that Palpatine actually being alive on Exegol is a good idea. That's cheap if you ask me. But I think the Empire existing without him and trying to regain control of the galaxy, that's not that crazy. So the plot of this episode, and probably the next one's going to be, they have to get Grogu. They have to rescue Grogu from the clutches of Moff Gideon. And in order to do that, they have to free this prisoner who has access to Imperial codes. And he says that they have to go to Morak to get these codes. And I guess that's kind of going to end up being the first phase of this mission, is he needs those codes to be able to access so they can sneak aboard the Star Destroyer of Moff Gideon to eventually free Grogu. Very simple. These kinds of plots, like we've talked about before, they're very simple plots. You're not going to get anything too complex from this show. And some folks have criticized that. But really, Star Wars as a whole has never been that deep. There is some deep stuff there with the Force and, learning about sort of the Eastern philosophy behind Star Wars. But the storylines have never been that crazy. A lot of what Star Wars is a bunch of heists. I mean, sneaking around. We saw it in A New Hope. We saw it in Empire, where Luke's sneaking around Cloud City. We saw it in Return of the Jedi, when they're trying to blow up the shield generator. We saw it in Rogue One. We saw it in Attack of the Clones, even when Anakin and Padme are in the droid factory. Like this, it's not that unique or that different. And a lot of these Mandalorian episodes are basically just going to be heists. That's pretty much what they are. And if it gets repetitive to you, I understand. I respect it. But it's kind of what Star Wars is. I mean, we saw it with the sequel trilogy also. It's just kind of part of the storytelling. It's not just an actual war. There's a lot of reconnaissance, a lot of sneaking around. And here it's no different. We got to go on a mission to later on do this mission. There's a very funny line where they're discussing how to break in and how they're talking about breaking into the facility, and they're talking about how they can detect the DNA of New Republic, like officers or people associated with it, and they were like, "So can Fett go in?" And then Boba Fett goes, "Let's just say they might recognize my face," which is a great line. That's pretty damn funny if you're familiar with the history of that character and where he comes from, which I'm sure most of you are by now. But the only thing is that Mando might be the only one who isn't traceable in this case, because this place is very secure and tied down. So they take out these Juggernaut troopers and then sneak up, or not sneak up, but they take their outfits, their Juggernaut trooper outfits to sneak in. Even Mando does it, so he's not wearing his Mandalorian gear for this adventure. There's this awesome action sequence where a bunch of pirates try to sneak aboard the Rhydonian tanks or whatever. That scene was awesome, and Mando's in there fighting them with his gun. Then he runs out of bullets or whatever. The blaster stops working. Not really bullets. Then he has to use his hand-to-hand. It's just really good stuff. It's a really good little action sequence they put in here on top of the moving tank. It was pretty cool. And it's funny because they were saved at the very end by TIE fighters and then, the stormtroopers. So it's like they're trying to... they're fighting against the Imperial remnant, the Empire. But the Empire saved their ass. They're obviously because they know that they don't know that they're actually hijackers, but it's just interesting how the Empire winds up being the good guys here in a way, Think about that. And we saw our second face reveal of Pedro Pascal as the Mandalorian when he had to have his face scanned to get the coordinates for Moff Gideon's ship. So I knew we'd see it at some point this season. I knew we would, but here we are, episode 7, of season 2, that is. It's there. And they had a joke about TPS reports, which has to be a joke. Is that not from Office Space? Is that where they got that from? Or is there actually a TPS reports in Star Wars? I don't know. And they mentioned Operation Cinder, which is part of the Battlefront 2 game from PS4. So they're all trying to tie all this together. But if you don't know that, you might be confused. And yeah, you got to go on Wikipedia to find out. The scene where they're having a drink is really insightful because they talk about, casualties of war. And they talk about, and I always love when Star Wars explores this, because the idea that the Empire is evil, yes, the Emperor was very evil, right? No question about it. But there were people working under him that may not have been that evil. Moff Gideon was evil. Moff Tarkin, Vader, of course, was evil till the very end. But the Stormtroopers, and this is that discussion that was had in the Clerks movie, if you remember Clerks from Kevin Smith, about how you've got these independent contractors who help build the Death Stars, and you've got these innocent people who, they joined the Empire because some of them have been brainwashed into believing that the Empire was actually, like what happened in Revenge of the Sith, that the Empire is actually benevolent and the Jedi were evil. And people... at one point believed, the Stormtroopers. I mean, you could see the way that they clapped in this episode, when they delivered the shipment or whatever. You can, not every Stormtrooper's bad. Not every Stormtrooper's a bad person. This was also explored in the Clone Wars a lot when we started noticing how you had the clones being these sort of humanistic characters, And it's one of those things where it always makes you kind of a little bit sad because you're seeing these Stormtroopers get killed all the time, but those men had families. I mean, they really, when you break it down, they're not all bad, and it makes you wonder, if people in the Empire look at, the destruction of Star Destroyers and big casualties of war and just say, damn, our friends are dying, look what happened to Finn in Force Awakens, very traumatizing, same thing with, on the other side, they're rebels, but they're also people, and it's just, it's always kind of a thing about war that's always been something that you can't really escape, and as I get older, I start to kind of notice that yes, one side is good and one side is evil in Star Wars, but the people, the soldiers, the foot soldiers, the stormtroopers, not all those people are necessarily evil people. They just are confused or they're on the wrong side without realizing it. And then when he shot him, after that whole teaser about, all they want is order. Yeah, I get the obvious pun here. I was surprised that happened, and it was a good kind of surprise. I'm like, oh, we are going to have a shootout, and here we are. And we got to see Slave 1 use some of the toys that we saw in episode 2, and that was freaking awesome. So, yeah, God, this was so much fun. That's the thing about Mando, man. It might not be complex. It's not the best written show in history, but it's fun to watch, and that's important. Mayfeld had a babyface turn here, and they were able to, Cara Dune let him off because of what he did. When he blew up they escaped on Slave 1 and he blew the entire facility up, and that was unexpected for sure, getting some things off his chest. He could be quite useful in the future, And then the ending of the episode where Mando straight up calls out Moff Gideon with the transport saying, you have something that belongs to me. Like, dude, that was so freaking alpha. He didn't have to do that. He could have snuck up on him. They could have snuck on the ship. No, he's straight up telling him, you have something that belongs to me, and I'm coming to take it back, which is going to be the lead into the next episode, the season finale of Mandalorian Season 2. Dude, that was so alpha, dude. What a likable character the Mandalorian is, man. This is what Star Wars needed. Again, another fun episode. I think last week and the week before were probably better, but this was so good. I cannot wait for the season finale next week. Mandalorian Chapter 16. But in the meantime, this was great. Thumbs up. I loved it. I had a great time. I'll talk to y'all soon.